Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. And welcome to our webinar on strategies for integrating ERP and EPM. My name is Tom Weaver. I'm a Business Development Director at MarketSphere, and I'm serving as our host today. And just for all of you to know, MarketSphere is an Oracle Platinum partner. We have proven itself as a leader in Oracle solutions across the enterprise performance management and the ERP suite of applications for many years now. I'm happy to have Enzo Santilli, our partner from MarketSphere, with us today. Enzo is responsible for the development and delivery of integrated enterprise performance management and ERP solutions. He works with clients across multiple industries to deliver improvement in finance and administrative processes, information technology, as well as operations. His expertise extends to key performance indicator design and development, business process control and evaluation, and accounting and tax close, budgeting, and reporting practices. In his work, Enzo provides strategic advice, program design and delivery, system selection, configuration, and integration services end-to-end, and serving finance, HR, and marketing functions. Again, thank you for joining us today. And one point is if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box on the right-hand column of your screen. And at the end of the presentation, we'll be fielding those questions and answering them directly. With that, Enzo, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. And I want to thank everyone that's on the call and on the webcast online following along the slides with me. What I want to do, we've entitled our presentation, "The Earth is Flat," kind of playing off of a phrase that's well known, because the purpose of today's call is really to understand how ERP and EPM can play together. And I've often heard through my many years in this space and doing both ERP and EPM selections and implementations for clients that, we've got one system sitting on top of another, or this one's bolted onto here. And part of what I want to do today is really to get everyone to start to think about that a little bit differently. And although there may be some truth to how you've got systems patched together or sitting on top or below or around or underneath, and the point today really is to bring out what an overall architecture could look like. Every client that we have is a little different. There really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but there are many common elements to being able to look at the space and to really getting the tools to be leveraged for you. And so we've got some exciting case studies. I've got a couple of pictorial diagrams that I hope you'll be able to follow along with as we go. And what I'd like to do is go through those now. We will, as Tom mentioned, have some time for Q&A. And again, thank you all for attending, and I'm just going to go right into it at this point. So quickly, a little bit about us, and I'm hoping that you can all see a slide that has a page number 4 on the bottom. But we are Oracle Integrated Experts. As Tom mentioned, we are a Platinum partner for Oracle, and we do everything on the transactional system side, the ERP side, from J.D. Edwards, PeopleSoft, and Oracle's EBS tool sets to sort of the middle layer in between, where we get into data warehousing, staging, data relationship management, and so forth, to the end EPM applications where our clients do enterprise reporting, analytics, financial consolidations, budgeting, planning, cost management, and many other tools. One of the particular relationships we have with Oracle is being not only as part of our Platinum partner, but because of some of our engagement experience. We've actually been on several of their product development boards for various products across the set, partner advisory council, and so forth. So there's a lot of interplay between the world-class leading solution from a technology standpoint and how we position ourselves in terms of being able to bring the advisement, the selection, and the turnkey implementation services. Well, many years ago, there was a guy, I'm told, named Copernicus, a famous person for those of you that have studied science, that just said, well, I wonder what would happen if we all believed the world was round. And that was in a day that many people believed the Earth was, in fact, flat, and that at some point you'd sail and you'd fall off the edge of it at some point beyond the horizon. And so his view, of course, was revolutionary at the time, and it then became the prevailing way of thinking. I think we all pretty much have confirmed and believe that that we live in a globe today. But I'm here from MarketSphere to tell you that today we're going to try to flatten that globe a little bit and try to understand how these applications do work end to end, and that we really don't need to look at them as isolated components. We don't need to look at certain things as just patchwork or something that bolts on or sits outside of, but really can all be accessible within your line of sight. And so just like many people before thought, well, once you can see beyond the horizon, you must fall off the end. I'm here to say that I think the horizon extends indefinitely. And one of the reasons that we do that, so we have a lot of companies that come to us and say, well, why do companies, why should we look at this from end to end? And a lot of times when we start working with organizations, there's somebody is thinking about the job as it turns out with the tool that they know. So if they're a PeopleSoft expert, maybe they're an SAP expert, maybe they're a Cognos expert, maybe they're an Oracle planning expert, but they look at things through the lens of the tool that you're there. Well, if we can take it up a level, what we are really starting to understand now is that, doing that, you really have to look at the overall architecture to realize, where should I put things? Where am I having performance issues? Where do certain tools take too long to run, jobs time out? Am I using the right tool for the job? What about my chart of accounts and my various subledgers? Do I have to re-implement them every time the business changes? Is there a better way to do this? What happens when I acquire a business, divest a business? Maybe divesting is a little easier than acquiring, but what do I do with the acquired entity? Should I put them on my core ERP system? Get that question an awful lot. Reporting, a lot of times we start to find out that a lot of the growth in EPM tools came as a result of some early failings years ago from ERP reporting packages that weren't what they need to be. And now you have to start to take a look at it and say, well, again, is there a right tool for the job, for the reporting? What are the different audiences? What are the different needs I have from reporting? But then probably more importantly, as you kind of move from tactical to strategic, it's really where a lot of the focus is after I've spent all this money on different investments, I really need to understand, where is my true source of profit? Which customers are making me money? Which products? Which customers to which products are making me money? What are the intersections of those combinations where I really win, and where do I really lose? We've worked with a couple of significant clients where the real issue was they knew that several of their customers, in sort of an 80-20 analysis, were making them 200 to 300% of their profits, and all the rest of their accounts were draining them. And so how can you really tell that without people just arguing about it around the boardroom table? Is there factual evidence that can support it? And then the use of capital is also something very, very important these days throughout a recessionary economy. It's good in any economy, but there's a lot of information that is buried in subsystems. How do I get that out, and how do I make the subledgers come to life in a dynamic way that you typically don't see come through out of just a simple stock report out of a system? So that really is where you get a lot of different reasons, and there are more than these, but why companies have started to think end-to-end. How can I look at a report that someone wants and relate it in the context of the platform that I have in ERP and EPM? What I'm going to do in the next few slides is go through an example of what the environment can do. Now, as each of these slides will build on each other, you'll see a lot of lines. I'm hoping that I don't confuse anybody over a phone call and over a webcast in the process, but I think part of what you'll see by the number of lines and the number of combinations is there really isn't just one way to do this, right? There's not a single path. There are certainly some best practices. There are certainly some ways that we would probably recommend against, but it's to just get you thinking about how an architecture can fit in. Not everybody needs every tool for the job. Some people need more of some, a little less of others, but it's just to give you an overall picture of how you can start with the ERP world and integrate EPM and really make the ERP come to life, really make the EPM world that you have come to life. So first thing, no doubt you have to have a base transactional capture system, and every sizable organization has done this in some form or another, usually through packaged implementations, but it all starts with your ERP GL. For a lot of our clients, this is a PeopleSoft, an Edwards, or an Oracle EBS solution. Maybe some others that you may have acquired or picked up with affiliates or acquisitions, but you've got a base general ledger, some core financial subledgers reporting into it, and then you've got some standard operational reports that will just come right off of that architecture that really don't lend themselves to integration everywhere else, and we tell a lot of clients that's fine. But the first thing you have to do is to make sure that environment is solid, that you're on a common chart of accounts, that you've got some way, even if not everyone's using the same ERP system, but that you at least have some commonality with respect to the chart and with respect to some other key dimensions such as customer and product definition and so forth. Then what we start to say is, all right, well, now you may have some subsidiaries, 1 through N. You might have 1, you might have 20, you might have 40 of them that perhaps are doing things their own way. We have an awful lot of organizations we work with where say, well, we picked up this company in Brazil and this company in Russia, or we bought this company in another state, and they're just running this simple thing, and we're just not ready to put them on our systems yet. So your world has to have a way of accounting for that. Everybody needs to consolidate results. Everybody still wants to produce margin analysis across the companies, and it's just not acceptable to say, well, they're going to hand us a one-page trial balance, and I'm just going to key them in to my GL and close from them. Companies want more than that out of their systems, and the good news is they can get there, right? So you don't necessarily have to wait until you've brought that acquired location up on your ERP system. There are many strategies that can be taking place in the interim. So, we would say connect those pieces. You may have operational, may refer to manufacturing systems if you're a manufacturing company, retail point-of-sale systems, healthcare operational systems. They can mean a variety of things depending on the industry you're in. What we then say is the number one thing you have to get, we get a lot of clients that say, well, do I need to have a data warehouse to do all of this stuff? And what if I don't invest in this? I'm going to have a hard time selling, getting a data warehouse up and running. What can I do about it? Well, what we tell a lot of clients is there will be some degree of data normalization that we'll have to figure out one way or another. But really, where we like to start with our clients is we like to say, well, we need to make sure the data relationships are coming together. And there's an Oracle product that does this very well, DRM. There's some clients that are a little simpler that don't always need that piece of the solution. But the basic component is you need some type of data relationship tool that allows you to manage all of your hierarchies, all of your what used to commonly be known as metadata, so all of your parent-children relationships, any types of rules that you like to maintain, controls on who can add either accounts, customers, products, whatever those pieces are. One of the key components to integrating them is that there's got to be some central backbone to that, even before you worry about where you're storing your summary transactions or any of the things that would typically go into a data warehouse. So start with the hierarchy and relationship management pieces next. Then you have to start thinking about, are there some quick wins in the organization? So, there's often in today's world little appetite to waiting many years before you see any value, and a lot of what we work with is speed to value in these cases. And so we start to say, well, there might be some particular business intelligence apps. OBI is one of them. There's others out there that may just be able to be reporting directly. So before I worry about building the entire enchilada, if I can at least have some common data structures in place through my DRM solution, and I can tap into either ERP or other operational systems, I can start to build some basic BI apps, particularly in the finance space. We typically see that that's where it starts in an organization. It's much more normalized. Projects tend to be driven by a CFO or office of the CFO. And so you start to get some acceleration of value and start to get people to buy in very early into the BI platform. As you continue, then pretty soon you have to start to figure out, well, at some point now I have to start tying this together. I have to start having adapters that come from my ERP system that are now going to start to work into my external systems. For a lot of companies, it gets to be a bit too complicated to close, to actually do the close and consolidation process in their ERP. If you're a single entity company, that could be an option. If there's some simplifying characteristics, that can still be an option. But many clients, as they get bigger or they've become acquisitive, need an external tool such as Hyperion Financial Management to do that. FDM is a tool in the middle that allows, basically builds a data model to allow that mapping to occur very cleanly and to make the implementations of these tools a lot more seamless and with a higher degree of data integrity. Also allows you to drill back so that if you're looking at a tool on the right side and you want to understand what are some of the underlying components, what are the accounts or the things that made up that balance, the ability to drill back and do that all on an online interrogation is possible. But it's a design decision to be made. We then now see, to focus temporarily here on the financial accounting world, a lot of movement toward taking this end to end. And I've worked with literally dozens of clients, even in the past year and a half alone, that are trying to say, well, we spent so much time re-engineering our close process. We've got it down to anywhere from 2 to 5 days, and it used to take us 10 or 15 or more. But so we've got a lot of cycle time reduction out of that. But after we produce the basic financial reports, taking it to the SEC, taking it to external sources that are compliance in nature is just taking forever. And so we haven't had a lot of efficiencies in that. And so you can kind of turn to the disclosure management tools that are coming along the way. Obviously, a lot of our clients and a lot of you on the call are subject to XBRL requirements in terms of your EDGAR filings and so forth. And so that piece of it can also be built upon the HFM platform as you move along. Then we get into the planning and analysis world. Bad economy, recession, no recession, this is really something that's taking hold. I know of almost no serious organization that's looking at doing financial planning and analysis in a robust way that is still trying to do something like this by loading cost center budgets and so forth to their ledger. There may be a limited use for that in some organizations, but it will never give you really the full picture. And so we start to work with components that are in Essbase and Oracle's EPM Hyperion planning tool. That then forms the foundation for what you see in the bottom right, the management reporting environment. And the reason it does is almost every organization wants to be able to have a central place where they can compare either budget, plan, forecast. There's different terms. There's different ways every company does it, but they want to see that right next to the actuals. They want to juxtapose those on single reports, have multiple scenarios, and be able to do variance analysis, be able to do those plans very iteratively, be able to plan at one level, report actuals at another, and be able to see them all tie together. And so the heartbeat of this thing ultimately becomes the management reporting that is being hung off of a planning and forecasting environment, and that environment is including actuals that have come from either the consolidation system up above or the ERP system that you see off to the left. Now, there are other tools that can help manage your EPM world. I won't dwell on them now, but EPMA is a delivered product in the Oracle EPM world that allows data to move between these applications and avoid a lot of the reconciliation nightmares that can trouble implementations. Essbase also allows for a lot of broader reporting and is a fundamental decision company. Some companies report all out of Essbase. Some use the OBI apps that I referenced before. Some use a combination of both that are invisible to the user. We'd like to see a combination of both because we do think there are different tools for different jobs. And so when you start to put this all together, you get a picture that starts to emerge of a close and consolidate solution, a strategic financial and operational planning solution, and that can be multiple applications within the overall tool set, an analytical application, and then just some gradual business intelligence across a number of subject areas. Again, well beyond finance at this point, by the time you reach this point in the evolution of number 8 that you see here, by that point in time, you're well on your way to doing this in supply chain and logistics and a number of other areas, and in some cases, customizing the tool as is indicated. But what that ultimately gets you is you've got this entire framework that you have a decision zone that is coming out of your BI applications. It's pulling things together seamlessly, sometimes directly from the ERP world, sometimes as outputs from the EPM applications. But that is really the crux of the things that people are taking to meetings and making important decisions about, perhaps even automating the reporting of that, creating alerts and dashboards and the like. But it all requires a pretty broad framework. So hoping that this gives you some flavor for it, as we mentioned, as Tom mentioned before, we are going to take a bunch of questions at the end. And so if you're jotting anything down or want to put anything in our chat bar at this point, go ahead and do that, and we'll take questions all in a streamlined form. We can come back to this page if that would be helpful at some point to describe it a little more. As I reiterated, or I will reiterate now what I said at the beginning, not every organization needs every piece of this. You know, there are times where it can look like, wow, that's a lot of what we're doing. But I think the point that I want to leave you with is these are a lot of very purpose-built applications and utilities across a framework that all integrate into the decision zone ultimately, and that's really where the value is created. So if you get the architecture right, if you understand the components right, most of this then ultimately is invisible to a lot of the end users across your enterprise. They're just really focused on decision making, but you can walk away knowing that you do have single source of the truth, perhaps multiple views of the truth, but a single source of the truth, and you're really starting to impact business results from it. Okay, what I want to do now is to just give you take some time to think about where you are in this particular piece of the evolution. As I said, we can take some questions later, make available this, sit down with anybody to discuss this. I'm going to now shift gears and just say, well, as we sort of stretch the earth, here's two examples of many that we've done across our firm where we're over a multi-year period have built the components that you've seen here. One of them is the Alcoa story, as many of you know. They are a bellwether to the Dow Jones. They are the first to release earnings every quarter. You see it every quarter. People talk about how they will be the first to release earnings. And while a large piece of that came through just process improvements that the organization put in place independent of the tools, what you'll really see here is how the EPM suite has really helped this process over time. When we entered the picture as they were working on this, again, many years ago at this point, a lot of legacy custom-built planning tools that were being maintained in markup language and so forth, just things that were completely homegrown, led to very static analysis. But there's a lot of pieces that then came into play. First thing we did on the planning side was to change a lot about the planning calendar, how it's done, who is able to input it, pushing responsibility out to people that are best positioned. If I want to know a sales number, there's two ways I should get it. I should either get it through some type of revenue waterfall that came out of my sales system, or I should have sales people or those in the sales organization be directly responsible and accountable for updating those through forms and through their contact management and sales management systems. What I should not do is sit there in FP&A and just guess at it for everybody else. And so we really got out of that world by being able to have a tool like Hyperion Planning, and really we're able to lock down and position good system design, good controls around the web forms and the calculations and the reports to be able to get something that's entirely global. And you can build very specific applications for your business units that are driver-based, or you can have very generic P&L-based applications for corporate or sort of your default model. And so you can take this as deep as you want, where you want it, but you can also keep it very general and still be able to produce a consolidated forecast. We then said, all right, well, let's move on to the S-based world. Let's get people really interacting with reports. And so we spent a lot of time working on that for thousands, literally thousands of global users that we train worldwide. Again, taking information from planning, taking information that went through the HFM and the Oracle EBS world from a close and consolidate perspective, and putting them all in one place where everybody could use them. Continued on to say, and if you recall I mentioned before, part of making the earth flat is the idea that the subledgers aren't buried behind the GL, never to be exposed. It's something that you can see across the entire horizon. The organization came to us and said, we really believe there's a strong business case here in terms of reducing our float and using EPM to actually make the collection activities of our company on open invoices actionable. Again, many people look at EPM as simply slice and dice, give me this by color, by state, by region, by whatever. And what we were able to say is, that is one very good use of it, but we also can start to build dashboards that are very action-oriented. And so if we've got a company that is exceeding their exposure that we want to have, or they've got a lot of outstanding invoices, the highest of the top 10 unpaid, we're able to use EPM to dynamically create that view, refreshed 4 times a day, that then allows our collectors to go in and say, well, let's work the accounts where we have maximum exposure and start to get our money and start to improve cash flow. So a use of BI that you often don't see. I think a lot of people look at them as just slicing and dicing, but they can very, very well be used to create an actionable analytic platform. Then you go over to the HR side. Common question when you get into a global company, how many employees work here? And sometimes that's not easy to answer. Sometimes that may require 20 phone calls due to patchwork HR systems that are very country and legal entity specific in organizations. The HR system in Germany isn't the same one that's used in Australia or used in the United States. And so no central place to calculate how many people are actually on our payroll without calling a bunch of people that are responsible for HRIS and payroll systems across the company. So that too is a view. Again, in this case, an OBI solution, Oracle Business Intelligence Enterprise Edition, a much better tool for that job. And so you've got both S-Base and OBIE in play. Many other clients as well, and then we just listed 4 of them here. These are 4 examples of where we took ERP and oftentimes used the opportunity of an ERP upgrade to then think about what could be done and what should be done where. We don't have enough time to discuss it today, but on some of the in-person roadshows that I've done, we've gone through other examples. For instance, where do I do allocations? How much of that should be in the ledger? How much of that should be somewhere else? What about other rules that I want to have exist? What is the best tool for the job, and where can we do it? And so a lot of times you can use an upgrade or a major acquisition or something that's a game changer for you to really revisit the platform and say, there are different tools that do a job well, and if I've got the right connectivity to keep all of these tools in sync, keep all of my metadata, keep all of my transactions in sync, then I really can go to the tool that gives me the best analysis at the optimal performance. And these are just a few, again, of the examples that we've done here that bring ERP and EPM together. We take one other example, a very specific one with Quest Diagnostics that we have and continue to do a lot of work with across different business units and locations for them across the country. Our entry point here was a couple of years ago when they called us to say, well, we know we need to do a technical upgrade in PeopleSoft, but while we're doing this, we're just begging for a chart of account redesign and we're begging for a lot of other things that we need to do to become Sarbanes-Oxley compliant and to just have fundamentally a better company. They're obviously a very distributed company. Most of you are familiar with them in terms of their lab services. If you've ever been to the doctors and have needed to draw a blood sample or something of that nature, they're clearly a company whose name and logo you'll see plastered through a lot of medical facilities around the country and around the world. And so that led to a lot of disparate ways of capturing systems across their network, and so a lot of focus on the governance and the control piece, very important to folks there, but also very important in terms of being able to get transparency, visibility, and accuracy into the numbers. And so they came to us and said, well, we don't want to just technically upgrade PeopleSoft. We want to use this as an opportunity. Yes, we need to do that, and we could probably do that behind the scenes, but let's also use this as an opportunity to really extend and stretch the platform and, again, create a flat earth within the world of Quest. And so, we looked at it. One of the things that we do, an A3 model of an analytical assessment, was to say, well, let's look at source systems, let's look at data management, let's look at reporting and analytics, and embedded in all of those, let's make sure we have good data quality and data governance processes. And so we started to think about how to do that, how to enable, how to take action, and how to manage data. Ultimately came up with a redesign of the chart, an upgrade to S-Base as well that really changed the management reporting definition, and then a lot of work done on the data processing and control on the governance piece to make sure that we had uniformity across the entire enterprise, multi-billion around the world. This ultimately provided a lot of value, not only to finance and accounting, but to tax. They're ahead of the game in terms of IFRS compliance as new standards come down. We've built that with that in mind. That's something we're doing for a lot of organizations now that have told us, don't put this on the front burner. We're not worried about it today, but whatever we do now, if we can make sure that we're capturing the elements in the form that we need while we're doing this effort, then we're really getting a multiple win-win. And again, the tools are there today that with the right consulting help should be able to get that in place and really get more bang for your buck. But then part of it was also, as I mentioned, a data governance strategy. We looked at that across 4 components: the data, the technology, the process, and then the people and organization skills, and really started to then focus through DRM and other tools around that and other processes around that, a single source of maintenance that can be pushed out, can still allow individuals to do what they need to do, but to have a centralized workflow as to how that happens and how data governance is approved. Again, if you're a big company that's got distributed locations, now's the time to really be looking at that, because the more you build without it, the more headaches you're going to have to maintain, the more reconciliation you're going to have to do. And so the ultimate product, everything that I've talked about, plus the last point that you see here, 500 million records of data covering 10 years are all normalized in the system. There's a standard data governance mapping process, 100% accuracy, ties out. It's a system that's built to last and built to be able to support the organization for many years to come. But again, it's a seamless world there. We don't really even talk that much about ERP versus EPM. We just look at it as the entire business intelligence decision framework and end-to-end, from financial reporting and just purely statutory reporting needs. It does that. Tax report does that, but it also does provides a lot of capability for decision making across the enterprise from a management reporting perspective as well. The entry points for us are all driven. Some of you might even be from some of these companies that we're showing here. Some of them have looked at from day one an integrated approach. I just gave you 2 examples of that. There's another 4 here. Some of them were driven by the ERP. There was something necessary about the ERP world, such as an upgrade or something, a new system selection, a major merger or integration where they really had to answer the ERP question. Some of them were EPM driven. Some of them were just driven by the idea that we really want value out of the tool, and if that forces us to go back to the transactional systems and subsystems to try to pull that together, then fine, but let's let the EPM piece drive it. And so there really is no right answer for that. From a clean sheet of paper, obviously the integrated approach works best, but often most organizations are in motion and in heavy motion, and so there's something that's driving the need. But if you take the thing that's driving it and use it as a chance to really think about your architecture, again, you'll get a lot more out of the time and the efforts that you're spending than if you just look at point solutions as a single piece to this. So with that as a backdrop, I wanted to make sure we left plenty of time for questions here and made sure that we had a way to approve that, as I said, or a way to approach that, as I said, what I would love to do is, if we need to go back to some of the slides on the architecture, some of the examples we presented, and talk through that more and clarify that a little bit more. And we have plenty of time to do that. With that, Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you. I believe you're going to help us facilitate through the questions, and we'll answer them as they come up.
Great. Thanks, Enzo. All right. A couple questions have come through. One is certainly, thank you, great summary and an overview of the references here. But if you have questions, as we said before, please send a chat message to all panelists, and we'll be happy to answer that now. But I do have two, Enzo, that I'll just kind of paraphrase here, and we'll go from there. First one is, who is the real driving force behind the integrated strategy at Alcoa and Quest Diagnostics? Was it finance, IT, or both?
Okay, great. That is a great question. So the driving force on a lot of these efforts, quite honestly, if you were to plot them all the way through, tend to be driven with a slight leaning toward finance. They are very much hand in hand, finance and IT, hand in hand. I mean, they have to work together, and actually to form a proper steering committee and to get the right governance in place for even attacking these types of products, you also need executive management, operational management involved. But the reason has been just historically, there's been a trend for a number of years where finance has been the strategic business partner in terms of the purveyor of information, and a lot of times the best place to start are with financial applications. And so while a lot of what we do, ties into finance, a lot of the applications are inherently not financial, but still tend to be a little bit driven by the CFO's office. Again, in close concert with the IT function of the company, but I would tend to say that they're driven a little bit more by finance. Finance is also uniquely qualified to help build business cases and so forth, and we've helped a lot of finance organizations through that. But there just tends to be. There's no rule that says there has to be, but I think if you did any type of benchmarking research, you would find that that's been the primary starting point.
Okay, thank you. Next question I've got here is, how long did it take these organizations to achieve their EPM, ERP integrated approach that they have today?
Okay, that answer really does scale based on the size of the organization. So the two major examples that we presented here were multi-billion dollar companies, anywhere from $6 to $25 billion at various stages for both of these companies. And some of the other examples I showed, you're still seeing $2 billion and above in most of the examples that were cited here. In most cases, honestly, it has been a multi-year journey, only constrained by a couple reasons. One is, again, very few companies started thinking about this as an integrated approach from day one. So they were in motion and already doing a lot of systems work when they started to think about it as a platform decision. The second thing that constrains it and typically makes it a multi-year effort is just how much you really want to spend at one time and where in declining order is the biggest bang for the buck. And so a lot of times what we do is to help a client through a roadmap very early on that allows there to be some intelligent design to everything you do so that you realize that you're building something with the intent of building another application down the road that may rely on it. So you want some intelligence to it so that you're thinking smart, that you're not ripping and replacing applications or components of applications later. But the journey is typically a multi-year period to really do all of the things we're talking about, again, constrained by budgets and resources. Now, one of the things I do want to highlight, though, is the speed to value and getting some of the basic business intelligence that I showed one of the earlier slides. That is measured in months, right? That is measured in weeks and months and not in years. And so, again, I think with a good roadmap, you can look at that and say, well, we're dying in certain areas. We can't wait 3 years for the total answer. We need some things up within the next couple of months. There is a place for the BI piece early on to just hang off of some areas that won't force you to be out of balance when you look at the overall architecture. But you can get that started, get some speed to value, get some information in the hands of the users, understand how your organization is using the tool in a matter of months, and then be able to plow that feedback into an overall longer-term architecture that's much more fully integrated.
Okay, thanks. I've got another question here, and it's a long one, but if we can go back to the previous slide.
Sure.
They refer to, so we have examples that refer to different approaches, obviously ERP, EPM, and integrated approach. And I think, going back to, our combined customers, I think our logo slide.
Was it the slide where we had a series of...
That's right. That's right, because with their questions around the approach by industry, they noticed that 2 healthcare insurance companies had focused from different parts, starting points, either ERP or EPM perspectives. And so their question is, so what explains this difference, given that they are in the same industry and very similar operations and regulations? What's their different approaches due to? Was there different approaches due to what tools they implemented first, either ERP and EPM?
I think, Tom, do I have the proper slide that you were asking about?
That's right.
Okay. So, and the question is, like you see, for instance, clients in healthcare being driven, if they're in the same industry, why would they be in different boxes? Why would one company have driven it from the ERP side versus the EPM side?
Correct.
Is that the nature of the question? Yeah. Again, most of it is what you're inheriting when you walk in, right? So the issue here is less one of whether a certain industry has a prevailing best practice on how to do something like this versus the nature of where they are in the evolution of their systems and the way individuals across the enterprise are using things for reporting. That's really what drives the difference here, and really why there isn't a one-size-fits-all. So it's not an industry best practice, leading practice question as much as it is, the day that a light bulb goes off in someone's head and says, hey, we really need to be thinking across the enterprise. How are we going to scale solutions, right? I just built a little application here that allows me to do sales reporting, but now somebody else wants to do operational reporting, and what am I going to do? I'm just going to build another application for that, or am I going to start thinking about what is my data model? What do these systems capture? How can I avoid needless reconciliation? How can I avoid people reporting different information to management and walking into a meeting with different reports? That varies company by company, and so it's less of an industry-specific question. It's more of a question of what tools they already implemented, what tools they either may already have licenses for, right? So some of this is driven by shelfware, but a lot of it is really driven by the vision. A lot of it is driven by, you kind of take what you have as a given, but you want to be able to go forward and understand what's the speed to the vision. And in some cases, that ERP backbone is very strong. It's common across the enterprise, and so we drive it from there. In other organizations, especially if there was a lot of growth by acquisition, there's a lot of kludgy, a lot of different ERPs out there, and we often tell our clients, you may have an ultimate goal to get them on ERP, but there's a lot you can do in the EPM space to quickly assimilate the results, consolidate results, and do some integrated planning and reporting. So it really is what life stage a company is in, more so than the industry that they're part of.
Okay. Thanks. Some other questions that have come through. This one's a very specific one. I don't know if we'll be able to answer it, but it really said, what % of these customers started with planning for, budgeting and forecasting?
Good question. So I think to answer that, and this won't be, an official number, probably more of a top of my head guess based on a wide client base, and we've done hundreds of projects for companies over the last 8 or 9 years as market sphere, and then many of us were in organizations prior to that. If I look at just the EPM-driven slice and say for a company that's starting with an EPM-driven approach and taking the ERP as a given and just trying to build on top of that, I would say that about 60 to 70% are planning-driven, but I'll say that with a little bit of an asterisk. It's usually a planning and reporting answer at the same time, right? So whether the client was doing it for planning's sake, right, for the fact that they really truly wanted to get better at their planning process, or they were doing it because they needed to be able to do a better job of reporting against the plan, right? So being able to consolidate a plan result and be able to show that in reports that are credible and being able to take the management for board reporting purposes. Hard for me to get inside their head as to what was driving it, but I would say, believe it or not, more of them are driven from the planning side, and then a lot of that is simply due to the fact that a lot of our planning clients were living in a world that was simply being done through commercial spreadsheet software before we enter. And that's different than the closing consolidation side, right? Every company closes in some way, shape, or form by hook or crook. Now, some of them are also doing it in spreadsheet software, but they can usually get more out of their ERP system in terms of trial balance and so forth. There's at least something that seeds it. On the planning side, if we really get a company that's doing something only in spreadsheets that day, then that is what's driving it. And a lot of times, now that doesn't mean we start that project first. We may start the consolidation project in parallel, the way that it gets sequenced is different. But I think the question here was, where did it really come from? And I would say that the hunger for being able to have forward-looking visibility vis-a-vis a plan and a dynamic forecasting process is probably driving the EPM world the majority of the time, probably 60 to 70% of the time.
Okay, thank you for that. And if there are any other questions, please submit them again to all panelists. And also from that slide that we had before, if you've got specific questions, and actually a few very targeted specific questions that have come through, I'll look to answer those separately, probably after the webcast today in our follow-up. And so if you do have those questions, you can send them to me, tom.weaver@marketsphere.com. I also want to share with you that this session is being recorded, and that over the next couple days, MarketSphere will be sending out a link to the recording where you can also see a copy of the presentation.
A couple of things, Tom, just in follow-up to a lot of this. So we do, I think, get a lot of questions on just the process of how to go about and really look at budgeting and forecasting tools and where does that go. We do have some additional material separate from this presentation that, some of my fellow partners within MarketSphere have put together on best practices related to planning, best practices related to consolidation, virtually every topical area here, how to approach an analytical assessment if you're looking at some of the BI and S-based tools, what are the right tools for the job, data governance. Virtually any one of these topical areas that we've covered, this has sort of been a presentation that was, again, designed to take you from end to end, but for each one of these components, we have multiple thought leadership pieces that we have either done in formats similar to this and that we could get you, either prior recordings or just even meet with any of you one-on-one and talk through them. So I want you to know if there was even a subtopic here, as I talked about, that piqued your interest, we have a lot of other material that could be useful if there's a certain element of this that you're dealing. I think we often get a lot of questions on currency translations, intercompany eliminations, et cetera, and there are just complete end-to-end thought pieces that we have on that can share perspective of what is leading practice versus what is usually decided at the individual company level, right? Some things are a matter of preference, but some things are a matter of a preferred practice, and so we can walk you through any of those in the right venue as well.
And Enzo, that actually leads well into this next question I just received. I'll just read it. Can you provide a canned agenda that has been used as a starting point to begin dialogue with CFO decision makers to go forward with EPM? Is there a canned needs assessment?
Yeah. I'd like to say there's very little that we do as a firm that's entirely canned because we just don't like to dust reports off the shelf and hand them out and say this is how you do it. But in terms of, I think the specific thing that you said, Tom, was an agenda. So is there a process by which you would follow to do it? Absolutely. Absolutely there is. The business case development around it. Where is the value? What is the speed to value? So how do we get some of those things up front to build momentum? Really, to be honest with you, it would be a shame to see any implementation fail for lack of not having the type of needs assessment and the type of approach to the business case, because the business case is there. And so if that's something that organizations out there are struggling with, clearly we've done that many, many times over and believe that it really should be. Frankly, even if you had a CEO that was giving you a blank check to do this, I don't know many CEOs that do that, but just hypothetically, even if they did, you'll want to have it just from a standpoint of visioning, because a lot of the tools that we're talking about here have what is known as the curse of flexibility, right? They are so flexible, they can do so much for you that if you don't really anchor on what it is, what your charter is, what your business case is, you can lose sight of it. You can have too much fun playing with it and having everybody build every little thing they wanted, and what you really want to do is have an overall vision that people are marching towards. So, yeah, that is absolutely something we can supply and discuss further.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions that people want to submit? We'll give you a couple more seconds now. All right. No more questions have come through other than the specific ones that I'll be responding separately to. And with that, Enzo, thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. And we look forward to talking about your EPM and your ERP integrated strategies in the coming weeks and months. Enzo, any last comments?
No, I do. I thank you all, and I thank you for the richness of the questions. That tells me we've piqued some interest. People are thinking about this in their organization, and as Tom mentioned, just would be happy to chat with any of you about your situation as it goes, but appreciate everyone's attendance. It's a very large group, and thanks for signing on.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.